This is a short pre-training message from the NIRAS Indevelop training team that will work together with you at the workshop in Ramallah later in September, where we will work on outcome mapping as one tool to do better planning, monitoring and evaluation practices. And the idea behind this short message is to go through very briefly some of the key concepts that we will go through during the training, but also to provoke some thinking amongst yourself so that you can come to the workshop fully engaged and reflect upon what is good PME practices. So, as M&E practitioners, we see that there are quite some common problems related to what is good planning, monitoring and evaluation practices. We see that many organizations have formulated quite unrealistic goals or objectives given the context they're operating in or the time frame of the project. We see that many organizations experience that they have lack of time and capacity or resources or access to useful tools that enables them to do good M&E. Many organizations tend to focus a lot on activities, what they do. They describe what they do, and that's also where they focus their monitoring, but perhaps not so much the results of what they do. We also see that some organizations, in addition to focusing on activities, they focus on the really long-term objectives, the impacts, the end results. But what happens in between is often left out in monitoring. And that's where that is the kind of results information that you really need to get to do good monitoring. We see that there is a slight confusion over the ownership of M&E. The M&E process is for whom, really? Is it to please a donor, or is it really beneficial to your own organization? And taking these problem identification into account, we hope that we can bring all these challenges together with us and discuss with you in the seminar. So given that we see this, how can we really improve M&E practices for your organization that is beneficial to you? So no real change that matters and that involves human beings is linear. And I think this is important to keep in mind, that the reality that we're working in and where we would like to see the social transformation and the change of behaviors and attitudes among human beings is quite a messy reality. Yet many M&E practices tend to ignore the fact that reality is messy and perhaps simplifies the ability to monitor change by identifying a few quantitative indicators. And we see that this information perhaps doesn't give us really what we need in terms of doing good monitoring and see if the project or the program is on progress or not. So we think there is definitely need for M&E approaches that takes the reality and human behavior and its complexity into account. So, during this workshop we will work with a methodology called outcome mapping. So this is one of the methods that we will introduce. We will also go through some other approaches and come up with some hybrid approaches. So outcome mapping is the methodology that can be used for planning and monitoring and also evaluation. It's active focused. It really puts emphasis on the who in the change process. And it focuses on change and social transformation. That is the core, the starting point. It puts people and learning at the center of development. It also provides strategic thinking and learning about the project's influence. So it can really be helpful to learn on what can the project influence and what is the change of the direct partners. What are the different spheres of influence? And it can clarify the logic and relationship between the actors that are involved in this messy reality where we all try to implement our initiatives. So, as I mentioned, outcome mapping can help to clarify the different spheres of interest and control that the program has. The first sphere is where the project has control. It's where you implement your activities, and you can control to a certain high degree the outcome of the activities. If the trainer that you have hired is not performing, then you can hire another training. So the program has relative direct control over the activities and the outcomes. Then we have the sphere of influence. This is where the program is moving towards this, out in this messy reality, where it starts interacting with actors, the relationship with actors, and the program can only influence the outcomes in this level. And then we have the last sphere that we call the sphere of interest. Is where the project, program, or intervention has quite indirect influence of the outcomes, because there are social, political, and economic factors, also environmental factors, that influence what is happening out here. So the project has relatively limited control over what happens in the sphere of interest. So if we add some of the concepts that you might recognize from results-based management, RBM or LFA, one can speak about the input, activities, and outputs. Those are relatively well placed in the sphere of control. This is where the program intervention can control to quite high degree. And then we have the outcomes, and this is that I mentioned before, the missing middle. Often the outcomes is when we want to start to monitor or see the change that happens in the actors that we work directly with. How are they changing their behavior as a result of the intervention? And the impacts, the really long-term objectives of the program that is happening and can only be monitored out in the sphere where the project has relatively limited influence. We will very briefly go through some of the key concepts that outcome mapping is using. So the vision, many of you recognize this. It's the ideal future. It's a long-term vision of the project. It's what usually sells your project or intervention. This is what you speak about with the donors. This is what you're contributing towards. And the mission, it's how the project contributes to the vision. So we used to say that it's the project's bite of the vision. This is really more closer to your intervention. And in outcome mapping, I mentioned before, it's an actor-focused approach. So what is called boundary partners is in outcome mapping are the partners that the projects work directly with and can influence. Let's say there are certain actors you directly interact with in order to strengthen their capacity. And for each boundary partner, in order to be able to monitor what change do we want to see, you formulate outcome statement that describes the behavioral changes of the boundary partners necessary to reach the mission and the vision. In outcome mapping, they don't use indicators per se, but use something called progress markers. And they are helpful to visualize the process of change required for a boundary partner in order to be able to monitor that the boundary partners are moving towards the mission and vision that you have set out. And each strategy for each boundary partner can be different, so it's important to think that there might be different strategies or strategy maps necessary for each boundary partner in order to reach the outcome statements and the mission and the vision. So these are I'm throwing these concepts out. We will go through them in more detail in Ramallah, but already some of you now might be interested in familiarize yourselves with these concepts. There are a lot of resources available on outcome mapping. I would definitely recommend that you go into the outcome mapping learning community at www.outcomemapping.ca. They also have Arabic translation of the book, Outcome Mapping, Building Learning and Reflection into Development Programs. That might be of interest for some of you. So for those of you that want to sort of dig into this prior to the training, feel free. If not, we will have time to discuss this together in Ramallah. And we are very much looking forward to seeing you in Ramallah. Feel free to contact us beforehand if you have any questions. And we are very much looking forward to be working with you and jointly reflect and come up with good approaches that really supports you in your planning, monitoring, evaluation and learning practices. Thank you.